You know, I think there's a very large group of the population, very large section of the American population that I think would like to see alternative views of events around the world. I think there's a large section of the population that has come to understand that the United States cannot win 7 wars, that the United States cannot keep enabling and supporting the militaries of Egypt and Israel and etc. and etc. You know, I think there are people who are fed up with that understanding of supremacy. I know that the Republicans, for instance, haven't yet come to terms with the idea that you can't win 7 wars. You know, they're going to run in this election with the view that you shouldn't just fight to contain, you should fight to win. You know, this is the Reagan legacy in the Republican Party. So you got to fight to win. So where do you win? Well, you have to win in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Colombia, in Iran. You have to clobber the Palestinians a little more. In Russia, against Ukraine. I mean, it's apocalyptic. I think the Democrats, being the slightly weaker imperialist party in the United States, have had some understanding, and Obama, I think, is a really good example of this, that you can't win more than 1 or 2 wars, and maybe none. And so you back off, even from Afghanistan. So I think there's a broad public out there that would like to now hear other narratives, alternative ways forward in Afghanistan, alternative ways forward in Palestine. Unfortunately, the Palestinian case is a very dry case, it's arid. The pathways forward are not easy to imagine. You know, the classical pathway of the 2-state solution seems to have been eaten up by Israeli state policy. The occupation cannot continue without, the spiritual death of the state of Israel, and of course, the actual corporeal death of the Palestinians. And the 1-state solution is not possible for a large section of Israelis who would not want to live in anything that's not a Jewish state. And demographically, a 1-state may not be a Jewish state. But on the other hand, that third option is a beautiful option. Because, after all, the United States is also a 1-state. And people are still able to articulate and develop their own cultural identities, religious identities. So I don't think there's a strict logic that says you need an ethno-nationalist state to protect, tradition or culture. I think multinational states are quite successful. So, I think there's a broad public that would like to have these conversations. But every time we try to hold these conversations, it gets closed down. And I think the day of the conversation getting closed down is over. Please.
I'm not as hopeful as you are about the people that are waiting to hear the truth. Except I'm holding some cautious hope because of the Black Lives Matter movement. If they can survive whatever's going to try to crush them. And I think they know there's a connection between Palestine and it's parallel lives, really. So could you talk a little bit about that, I guess, what impact that might have on opening up discourse in this country?
That's a great question, and there's a very fine essay in here by Robin D.G. Kelly, the African-American historian from UCLA, who, by the way, wrote the best book, apparently. I'm not a jazz person, but I'm told his book on Monk is brilliant. But Robin's best, most beautiful book is called Freedom Dreams. And in many ways, I think he's as optimistic as I am about the world, temperamentally. By the way, one's temperament is never always a reflection of reality. I'm generally an optimistic person despite the scum that surrounds us in the world. By scum I mean the ideas, not people. So Robin's essay is beautiful because he connects the Ferguson issue with Palestine and does it, I think, quite straightforwardly. He brings back ideas like national liberation. These are not liberal ideas, these are very strong ideas about people's assertions for dignity. Right after Ferguson and of course after this last war, a group of Ferguson activists went on tour in Palestine. And one of the people who went with them was Mark Lamont Hill. And there's a video that you can watch of them, I think it's in Nablus, singing a civil rights song in the square in Nablus. It's a beautiful video. There is a very well-worked consciousness now. There's been a return of the idea of indivisible struggle. That means struggles here are related to struggles elsewhere. And I just hope this idea of indivisible struggle doesn't merely become rhetorical. You just need to chant these 6 slogans at every rally. It's a rally for healthcare, so we chant for Black lives and for Palestine. And I don't think that's productive. I think we need to find concrete ways to approach these struggles. And in that regard, I personally find the BDS campaign to be the Boycott, Divest, Sanctions campaign to be a concrete way to get involved. And I think that many of the people involved with that trip and otherwise in the African American progressive community have been talking a lot about somehow finding links to the BDS movement. Now I have to also say that the government of Israel is very shrewd and has these very important campaigns that it runs among, for instance, African American religious leaders and others where they come on tour. Just as Black Lives Matter goes on tour, they also come on tour. And Robin writes about this other linkage from above, and this happens in many progressive American movements, movements such as, for instance, for gay rights. There is what is known as, homo-nationalism or pinkwashing, where, the claim is made that Israel is the only country in the Middle East that supports gays and lesbians. So there are these very, I think, important things that the Israeli government is doing simultaneously to build international solidarity. One has to be aware of that. I think the question of people who, in the image I used in my introduction is, if you take a pillow and you suffocate somebody, you can't expect them to lie back and die. They will struggle. So if you take communities in the United States and you treat them with no dignity, when their grievances are not addressed at all, when they have hopelessness as the middle name of their children, and then you expect them, or you're dissatisfied with them not acting like liberals. It's an incredible assumption that people in power make, and it's the same assumption that people make every time there's a war in the Middle East. Why are the Palestinians fighting back? Well, when you put a pillow on somebody's face, they're going to try to kick you. And you can't assume that people who have been treated without dignity are going to behave in some kind of seminar discussion room. Liberals are made from a point of great privilege. Liberals are not made just by being born. Yeah.
Since you brought up BDS, I read this morning that there's a bill that's being pushed through Congress by a Maryland congressman regarding penalizing anybody like college campuses that support BDS, as well as putting pressure on the European Union not to go ahead and follow through. If you can talk a little bit about this bill and how is it going to affect BDS?
So, again, this is not the first bill that they've tried to put forward. It's the first coming to Congress. There have been a number of other, pushbacks, as it were, to delegitimize BDS. In Israel itself, there is, I think, a new apparatus to get people in trouble if they support the boycott in any way. I mean, there was an article written, silly article in Haaretz against Peter Barnard about whether he's going to get into trouble for talking about boycott of the settlements. The settlements are illegal by international law. The United States government sees them as illegal. You'd imagine then there should be no controversy over saying boycott settlement products, because that's what the European Union boycotts. Or at least that's what the standard they've set is the boycott of products that are produced in settlements. For instance, my personal favorite, SodaStream. And so when this is the standard, how can an American congressman put a bill through the US Congress which chastises the Europeans for upholding the American standard? But this is the nature of American politics. It's absolutely abysmal. You know, the logic is totally defeating to me. The fight against BDS, I think, demonstrates the utility of this strategy. In other words, the government of Israel is seriously perturbed by the growth of BDS campaigns and the BDS movement. And I think for good reason. And I don't think we should understand BDS to be a campaign that is actually supposed to hurt the Israeli economy. BDS is a campaign against the brand. That's what BDS is. It's an anti-brand campaign. It's just to say, when you think of, you know, Israel, or when you think of, let's say there was a book published a few years ago called Startup Nation, about how Israel is, you know, a tech society and such like. Well, you shouldn't be able to think about that without also thinking of the settlements, or without also thinking about, you know, the bulldozer that killed Rachel Corrie. These things have to always be on mind. That's actually something deeply worrying for the state of Israel. This idea that BDS is going to damage the brand. So I think that that's what is worrying them. The European case is different, because one of the things about Europeans is that they're not as hypocritical as the United States. You know, the United States says settlements are illegal, but then does nothing about it. You know, the Europeans say settlements are illegal, and then they say on settlement products we're going to put stickers that say made in a settlement, which is, you know, better than American hypocrisy, but still hypocritical. Because if you say it's illegal, then you can't be importing the stuff. I mean, you know, then don't say it's illegal. So their hypocrisy is better than our hypocrisy, but at least it gives some space to have this discussion, you know, where at least they're doing something which, you know, the American government now wants to put. So in other words, what I'm saying is that we have to always be vigilant about what these governments are doing, but none of this can stand any test in a court, because they're utterly garbled and incoherent bills that the Republicans mainly, but supported heavily by the Democrats, have put to stop things like the BDS. They are so garbled that they'll never stand in court, and I therefore think that they'll never be able to actually pass Congress and become law. Because this is a little bit like their hallucinations about Iran. You know, similar kind of absolutely incoherent politics. I think in that sense, it shows that they're rattled, but I don't think we should be scared. One more maybe, and then you can have a look at this beautiful book. Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming, and I really hope you